Good evening and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 10th, 2018. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a citizen advisory group to the City Council charged with making recommendations concerning land use plans, planning processes, and/or on matters of plan implementation. All regular meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission are recorded for record retention and transcription. Following is the official agenda of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Discussion and commission action will be limited to those items on the agenda. Any citizen who wishes to address the commission shall first be recognized by the chair and shall give his or her name and address for the record. If a citizen wishes to read documentation of any sort to the commission, he or she shall first seek permission from the chair. Oral testimony may be restricted to no more than 3 minutes per person. Agenda item number 1 is the roll call and disclosure of conflict of interest, ex parte communication, and site visit. So, Aislinn, if we could have you call the roll, and if each member of the commission would please state their name, what area they're from, and anything that they may need to disclose.
My name is Bill Hancock. I'm from the Lewis and Clark neighborhoods, and I have nothing else to report.
Sean Hargraves.
My name is Sean Hargraves. I live in the University neighborhood and I have nothing else to report.
Jack Moore.
I'm Jack Moore. I live in the Old Town District and I did a site visit to the wildlife and to the Juniper Hills Division. Agenda items, I'm not sure which agenda items they are since the numbers have changed. So.
Nothing else to report.
And I have nothing else to report.
My name is Sarah O'Connor. I live in the College neighborhood, and I have nothing to report.
Julie Sanders.
My name is Julia. I live in the South Park area. I completed site visits to agenda items 3 through 6, and I do live about 350 feet, I don't know, from the Wildlife Way agenda item.
Ryan Satterfield.
Ryan Satterfield from the Highland area. I did a site visit on agenda items number 4 and 5 and have nothing else to report. Also, for a matter of information, and I should have done this before the roll call, but the Idaho Power contract rezone that was scheduled for this evening's meeting has been rescheduled for the January 24th meeting, so everybody is aware. All right, agenda item number 2 is approval of minutes. Commissioners, I assume you've had a chance to go over the minutes, and if there's any discussion, we can have that. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Aislinn, would you call the vote?
Hancock.
Yes.
Sanders.
Yes.
Hargraves.
Yes.
Moore.
Yes.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes. Motion carries. On to agenda item number 3, public hearing for contract rezone. This time has been set aside for the Commission to hear comments from the public regarding a request by Virgil Janke of North Star Supply, LLC, represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying, to rezone by contract 3.99 acres, more or less, of land located on South 5th Avenue, south of Hildreth Road, from residential commercial professional to light industrial to be utilized for wholesale sales. So if we could start off by hearing from the applicant.
Good evening, Commission members. My name is Mitchell Greer. I'm with Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying here in Pocatello at 600 East Oak. So Mr. Janke wants to propose basically a little project that looks like this. So we did kind of a rendering of what is proposed for that location. This is what it ultimately is considered to look like. As stated in the staff report, he has started construction on this building right here. And it is going to house a new company that's coming to Pocatello. They're bringing some new jobs. What they're doing is consolidating their operations in the region to Pocatello and going to locate in that building. So they've presently got some things in Idaho Falls and I think Twin Falls and things like that. And so they're consolidating to Pocatello because it kind of makes sense with the transportation network and things like that. And so we're hoping that we can find support to do this rezone, basically to support some of that, and because we believe it makes sense. So the project is 4 acres, as was mentioned. Essentially, if you look at the map that I provided, and I don't have the zoning there, but most of the property around it is already kind of a light industrial type use, with the exception of the school. So the school is the only use out there that's really contrary to what we're asking for, and we feel like it fits okay with the school as well. But basically, the new CAT facility was rezoned light industrial when that project went in. It's on the other side of the school, just to give you an idea, and that's City of Pocatello light industrial. Across the interstate in this area is both city and county light industrial, so south of our project. On the west side, essentially, of our project is kind of mixed use zoning in the county, which allows for light industrial and any variety of types of uses. And across the street is actually a mixed use zone as well. So the residential properties really are located more removed from South Fifth, and most of the uses that are happening in that area are light industrial uses along South Fifth. And so if you look at what's in the immediate vicinity, I believe that is Tri-State Motor. There's the FedEx building that went in. This is some industrial or light industrial type uses in that area. There's some storage that has started. And so if you look, that's kind of west of our site. East of our site is that CAT facility minus the school. And then north, there is some residential north of the site, but it's very buffered from where we're at, and should be pretty straightforward, I think. So if you have questions, we'd ask that you recommend approval here, and hopefully there's nothing too controversial about it.
Good, thank you, Mitch. Any questions for Mitch? All right, thank you. So if we can now have the staff report, Carl?
Good evening, members of the Commission. Carl Anderson, Senior Planner, for the record. As noted by the applicant and described in the staff report, this application is for the rezoning by contract of 3.99 acres of land located southwest of the intersection of Hildreth Road and South 5th Avenue. The property is currently zoned residential, commercial, professional, and the applicant is requesting a rezone by contract for light industrial for the sole use of wholesale sales. The application was submitted by Virgil Yonke of North Star Supply LLC and represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering. Per staff's analysis of City Code Section 1702 180E of criteria for review, staff has concluded that the development is compatible in terms of scale, mass, coverage, density, and intensity of the surrounding land uses. The staff recommends approval of the application with the conditions attached in the staff report. The recommended conditions in that staff report are that upon contract rezone, the subject property shall be zoned as light industrial for the sole use of wholesale sales. Upon the cessation of the proposed use of wholesale sales, the City Council will consider the adoption of an ordinance reverting the subject real property to its previous land use zoning district or the zone most appropriate at that time. Should the applicant wish to subdivide the property through either a short plat or a full subdivision, a traffic impact study shall be required pursuant to City Code 16.20.030.b. All outdoor lighting shall meet the requirements as provided under Municipal Code Section 1705.420. Any standards, regulations not here noted but applicable to the proposed development shall be strictly adhered to. Any activity requiring a separate development or building permit shall comply with applicable regulations. All noticing requirements for this application have been met and no public comment has been received at this time. At this point, staff recommends approval of the contract rezone application. Happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Very good, thank you, Carl. Any questions for Carl?
Carl, just one thought or discussion. In proximity to the school, I know Caterpillar went out there. This looks a little more proximate to the schools. There have been any thoughts or conversations about the impact as far as busing out there or other things to the school?
Within the staff report, I do recommend that the applicant reach out to School District 25 to coordinate on busing routes for any potential shipping and to identify those hours. Hildreth Road is accessed by those school buses to transport students to Century High School, and the property under consideration tonight is accessed off of Hildreth Drive as well. So staff encourages the applicant to reach out to School District 25 to identify what those hours might be and to coordinate with them and work around those hours. At this point, based on staff's analysis and Public Works has also reviewed the application, there is not, staff is not concerned at this time that they will conflict with each other, but does encourage the applicant to work with them.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carl. With that, we will move into the public hearing, and I will now open the public hearing. If there are any that would like to speak in favor of the applicant, any that would like to speak who are neutral to the application, any that would like to speak that are opposed to the application. With none, we will now close the public hearing. And if there's anything else that you would like to say, applicant, to rebut?
I would like to just mention one thing relative to the traffic. It's very light on traffic, okay? It's, these buildings look fairly large, but they're mostly kind of storage, a small section for office and things like that, but essentially it's very light on traffic. They're not anticipating a large volume of trucks in and out, although part of the reason why they selected this location was to make it accessible for their trucks. But again, it's not, what's proposed there now is not going to be a huge traffic concern. We don't know what could happen in the other buildings, obviously, but right now the traffic is going to be very light.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, with that, the items before you for any discussion.
I drove my daughter out to Century High School for 3+ years, and I'm familiar with that area. I know I asked questions about it, but I trust also the applicants are good neighbors, and just open dialogue can go a long ways in those types of things. We've already seen Caterpillar go out there. I was a little bit shocked at first, thinking that Caterpillar was moving out there next to the high school, but it seems to have been successful, and I agree that it's very consistent with what's around there. I drove down that South 5th every day, and you're right, it's industrial going all the way down, and I like the idea of new jobs coming into Pocatello. That's always a good thing for a community and help, and the renderings and all that I think look quite attractive and appropriate for what's supposed to be there. So despite raising my concerns or questions, I believe that it's a good thing. Would recommend it.
Excellent, thank you, Bill. Other items to discuss? If none others, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd move that we approve agenda item number 3 and make a recommendation to the City Council. Findings of fact and a recommendation to the City Council.
Very good.
I'll second that.
Great, so it's been moved and seconded. Aislinn, would you call the vote?
Hancock,
Yes.
O'Connor,
Yes.
Hargreaves,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes, motion carries. Now, agenda item number 4, another public hearing for annexation. This time has been set aside for the commission to hear comments from the public regarding a request by Billy Satterfield of Juniper Land Corp., represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying, to annex and zone 13.91 acres, more or less, of land located east of Juniper Reserve Division 1 and south of Partridge Ridge Subdivision 5th Edition. The proposed zoning for the property is residential low density. A comprehensive plan land use map designation is proposed to accommodate this zoning request. So if we could start off by hearing from the applicant.
Mitchell Greer, Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying again. Let me see if I can just realign here a little bit. And then we'll get up to the project location. So this is the project. Juniper Reserve Division 2 is located in part of this zoning or annexation request. You guys approved Juniper Reserve Division 1, which is located right here. This is Shadow Pines that curves through this location. You can see in Google that the construction portrayed there for this particular project. So it accesses off of Satterfield Drive, Stone Ridge, through Stone Ridge, and then on to Shadow Pines. This area has been developing for the last 20 years or so, gradually working its way up the hill. So this is just in anticipation of some additional development. I don't think there's really necessarily anything planned immediately, but just to get out ahead of some of this stuff that takes a little bit of time to work through. So you can see the area that we're talking about is in red and kind of hatched back in white. It's 14 acres, give or take, that bisects part of what will be Juniper Reserve Division 2. All the surrounding properties are zoned residential low. That's what we're requesting. All the lots within the development are much larger than what would be required by that zoning designation. And so with that, I think it's pretty clear cut. We'd ask that you approve it. Unless there's questions or anything, I just ask for your approval.
Thank you, Mitch. Any questions for Mitch?
Keeps looking at me. I don't know why he said that.
Very good. Now, if we could have the staff report, Carl.
Carl Anderson again for the record. As noted in the agenda and described by the applicant, this application is for the annexation and zoning designation and comprehensive land use map designation for approximately 13.91 acres of land located east of Juniper Reserve Division 1 and south of Partridge Ridge Subdivision 5, extending the city corporate boundary east of Juniper Reserve Division 1. The application was submitted by Juniper Land Corporation and Billy Satterfield of Juniper Land Corporation, and represented by RMES. The request is in statutory compliance with Idaho Code Section 50-222 as a Category A annexation where all private landowners have consented to annexation. In this case, Juniper Land Corporation is the landowner and the applicant. The property is located within the area of city impact and lies contiguous to existing city limits at the westmost property line, eastmost rather. Per city code, it's 17.02.110. As land is annexed, it shall be given a comprehensive land plan designation based on provisions of section 17.01.130 and the plan designation zoning district conversion chart of this title and the review criteria listed in subsection 1702.180E. Based on staff's analysis contained in the staff report, a residential comprehensive plan land use map designation is appropriate and is consistent with the surrounding area, as is the residential low density zoning request, which allows for single-family dwellings and a mix of other housing types such as accessory dwellings, townhomes, and two-family dwellings. Some civic and institutional uses are also conditionally permitted. At this time, staff recommends approval of the proposed annexation, provided that the subject property shall be annexed into the corporate boundaries of the city of Pocatello, that upon annexation, the subject property shall be zoned as residential low density, that upon annexation, the subject property shall be given a comprehensive plan designation of residential, and Exhibit 1 shall be made part of the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation and council's decision. No public comment. All noticing requirements have been met at this time, and no public comment has been received. I'm happy to answer your questions, and Merrill Quayle of our Public Works Department is also here to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Excellent. Thank you, Carl. Any questions for Carl or Merrill on this application? All right. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will open up the public hearing. If there are any that would like to speak in favor and give testimony in favor of the application? Any that are neutral to the application? So if you'd come forward, state your name and address.
My name is Adam Jacobsmeyer. I live at 1474 Stone Ridge Drive here in Pocatello. It's just off of the subject at hand. Thank you for the map. That was very helpful. A couple questions that my family and I have in regards to this building. We've moved in just a couple of years ago. We were unaware of the first development. It would have been nice to put some input into that as well. If you look at the subject and you consider the school that is supposed to support this, Idaho is already at capacity. In fact, when we moved in, we were told we would have to go to 10 billion. And last minute changes, we were actually able to get into Idaho. But I look at this plan, but I don't know if this would be the appropriate forum, but I'm going to throw that out there, is I don't see a lot of plans for other elementary schools. The other thing that many of the residents in this area enjoy is the open space. Other residents and other communities that I've lived in, when you plan a development, you'll also keep some area open, whether it's a park or whether it's just natural plants and whatnot. And I'm not seeing a lot of that. Now, granted, this isn't set in stone, but I would hope that that would be taken into consideration as well. And lastly, based on what I've seen with the first development, it being called Juniper Reserve, a lot of the trees have been plowed over, filled in with dirt, and the ravine filled in as well. And as you look at the property lines, there are two large ravines just the southwest from the water retention off of the LDS Church, which appear that they'll have the same plan, and that is to fill a majority of those natural ravines with the loose dirt, losing the tree line that we enjoy. Shawn Street traffic is also a consideration. They've mentioned Satterfield, they've mentioned Stone Ridge, which probably could take the additional traffic. But the cut-through street, Shawn Street, the steepness, the fact that it is a turn on to Satterfield may need to be taken into consideration. The steepness and the width of it are probably not conducive for that volume of growth. And lastly, that's probably for this meeting, I guess the idea of the types of homes, a lot of them are just ranch style. A couple of homes that have gone up just recently, a 3-story, which look just out of place. And I would hope that as they develop this area, that they take that into consideration and not make it a high-rise type environment. I know I've used my time, but thank you for listening to me.
All right, thank you. Any others that would be neutral on the application? If you'd please come forward, state your name and address.
Brad Yates, 1468 Stone Ridge Drive. So we're right across from the very end of the current development. I have a question about why this is an annexation and not a completely separate application for a subdivision, and what, the workarounds or the shortcuts of annexing versus maybe a fuller review of the kinds of issues that Mr. Jacobsmeyer just raised. Is that something that staff can speak to?
So right now, we're just taking testimony, and if you want to ask the questions, that's fine, and then we can have them address that afterwards.
Okay, that's fine. So I appreciate it if you would address that. The other thing that I would like to raise for consideration by the Planning Commission here is that this first development was just basically leveled, right? There's piles of dirt, piles of junipers left there in not a very neighborly way, right? So it's, for somebody who was a customer on the Stone Ridge development to be subjected to, basically just leveling that and leaving it that way for months on end, I would hope would be addressed, in future developments, right? It's unsightly. It's it doesn't improve the property values, right? It's not from a customer service or relationship standpoint, rather not friendly business practice.
All right, thank you. Any others that are neutral on the application? And any that would be opposed to the application? Okay. Seeing none, we will then close the public hearing and give some time to the applicant to rebut any comments that have been made.
I appreciate the opportunity to hopefully provide some clarity here and then maybe address some of the concerns. The school situation, I kind of live in that area as well. It's been a concern, certainly, as far as schools go, and I can't speak for the school district, but they do have additional properties available to develop new schools in that area, and I think once they get pushed over the limits that they've identified, they will construct new schools. So just to keep in mind, or to point out one of those locations at the intersection of Jerome and Chubbuck Road, there's a site that was designated for school, for a new school site, and I know there's been some discussion about potentially a second school behind Idaho at some point when the demand requires it. So I can't really speak for them, but I know there has been some planning to address some of the schools. It has not been a hidden fact that probably the majority of development in Pocatello has been occurring on that east bench. And so certainly I think the school district is well aware of that and making hopefully appropriate plans for that as well. The trees, I can speak a lot about that, and we love the trees, and that's part of the reason why this area is as desirable as it is. We are presenting a preliminary plat for the next phase of division, or the next division that would happen, which would be Juniper Reserve Division 2. And if you read down through the conditions in that staff report, it talks about, and I don't have the here in front of me, but basically we have to do some firewise things in that draw, and that's a nice way to say, hey, we need to take all the trees out. Basically, I mean, that's to put it kind of bluntly. On a lot of the developments up here, part of the mystique is the trees and things like that, and we have to balance that with with creating safe development for the neighbors or for the residents that will be there. As far as what happened down here in the draw, What we did is improve that drainage facility. There's certainly some issues associated with that drainage facility. So we came in there, we enhanced the access, we made the drainage facility much better. If you guys remember when we did the preliminary plat for Juniper Reserve Division 1, that was one of the discussions. We enhanced the access. We actually repaired a few things that were failing in that system, and so we made that a much better situation for the city and for the residents, and a safer, better situation. So we did take some trees out associated with that, and we did take some trees out as we developed, but as a condition of that Juniper Reserve Division 1, the fire department again was somewhat concerned about those junipers, and so it creates a hazardous situation if there's a fire in those areas, and so we have to deal with those. 10 or 15 years ago, we saved every tree and we didn't create pockets, and things like that. We've learned, I guess, from some of the fires here recently that we need to do a little bit more to make it safer for the residents. So our intent is not to take all the trees out. We want the trees as much as safe. So that's how that goes. So again, jumping ahead a little bit, we are preserving an open space area that's kind of the top of this draw, and that's been a planned open space area for many, many, many years. This is the last section of that open space. So this whole draw is left as open area where people can hike and do a little bit of recreation there. And we are preserving that as open space. So there is a little bit of open space. It's not like a normal subdivision where there might be a park or something. A lot of this land gets preserved. Some of the draw areas and things that need to keep as natural, we use that kind of to supplement some of those. The traffic, I think, again, this is going to create kind of a looped infrastructure once it's constructed that ties into Summit, ties into Satterfield through Michelle, and so there's several opportunities once this ultimately gets looped through for the traffic volumes. And again, although if you live at the bottom of Shawn Street, again, it might seem like a significant increase. The streets there have been reasonably planned to accommodate the traffic volumes that are expected in this development. So again, I wouldn't want to speak too much more about traffic, but I just say that the transportation network is adequate to handle the traffic that will come from this development. As far as the height restrictions, again, we're not developing the homes in this area. We're selling to potential buyers, and we're at the mercy of what they would like to build, I guess, for the most part. There are covenants that restrict certain things, but again, we want to give people the freedom to build and develop what they see as their, what they would like to see there. I will say that the zoning that we're requesting limits the height to 35 feet, and so, that will allow for a two-story building, and sometimes, when you have a basement that looks like a three-story, it looks like a three-story structure, but it's essentially only considered a two-story structure. So 35 feet would be the maximum height from the ground level to the top of the structure. The piles of dirt, that's it's a little bit of a dilemma that we face in all of our projects. And what ends up happening is typically we try to leave a pile of dirt. I know it sounds contrary to what would be good practice, but as we develop these lots, typically they need additional material to create lawns and do things like that. So at this stage, we try to have a little bit of excess material to accommodate the home building, and the intent is by the end of the ultimate project, once the homes are built, that dirt is gone. That's not always what happens, but that's what we strive to have happen. As far as the trees, I was not aware of trees left there, so I would certainly want to find those because the contractor's required to remove those. So I'd let, yeah, hopefully, he's supposed to take them off the site, so I'll need to get with him and we'll get rid of those trees that are left there. So I think, again, if you look at the criteria for approval of the annexation and zoning request, I think there's 6 criteria that you guys need to follow. I think that for the most part we meet all of those criteria, and we just ask that you approve the request.
Thank you, Mitch. Any questions for Mitch?
I have one.
Julie?
You mentioned that there's a draw that's still open space. How does the public get to that?
Well, this is open at the bottom, so as you come across, this is all open, so it opens up to the bottom. And I think as we get up to the top, maybe we'll reserve, we kind of looked at reserving a little trail access or something at the top so people could continue out along and out of there, back to the street. This particular draw has a long history. I don't want to bore everyone with it, but it's not really necessarily a connected draw to all the rest of these open space areas, and you can kind of see, as we developed up in here, we've preserved a lot of these draws, and you'd be surprised how many people hike and bike and different things in those draws. But this particular facility does not kind of connect into those other draws, and so it's not as, I guess, desirable necessarily, but it still is something that has some benefit, and so we're going to leave it open, and it is accessible from the bottom. I think potentially we'd put some sort of access out to the road at the top that would allow someone to still continue along, and if you were walking, to be able to get out and get into one of those other open space areas. And so you can kind of see the ultimate master plan of that area. Ultimately it's going to tie into McCaleb Drive. Michelle will tie into McCaleb and create some more looping as far as that goes. There's also a draw or an open space area that would be on the basically kind of south side of the development ultimately. So the south side of some of this annexation property would have some open space associated with it as well.
And somehow there would be an entrance to that as well.
Yeah, so if you look at long term, so not to get too far out, but this is Granite Drive that goes around. And this is, again, was open space in that subdivision to kind of preserve some of that draw. And so you can walk down through there, and ultimately kind of connects into Ridgewood Road. All of that has not been developed and kind of deeded or put into public use yet, but that's the ultimate plan. Is yes, there's kind of a connected series of draws and areas that people can use that live in that area, or the general public. Mr. Satterfield, if you remember, and I don't know if it's going to show in this particular drawing, but you can kind of see it right here. So Ryan Satterfield, with Satterfield Realty, we preserved kind of a little access to the draw in this location, and it came down. There's a pathway that comes down to connect into that draw, and we created some parking there. And kind of the same thought is up here in the kind of the can't remember the name, Bluebird area, I guess, Bluebird Gulch, but is up in here. There'd be a little parking area here, and that would ultimately allow access into some of these other areas. So there is a loose plan of connecting all that and having kind of a nice system once it's all done. There's several different developers in that area, so they've all pretty well agreed that that's kind of the ultimate overall plan for those draws in that area.
Very good. Any other questions for Mitch? Thank you, Mitch. Any questions for staff? I actually do. Carl, if you could come forward. So, Mr. Yates posed a question about discussing annexation versus just, talking about whole plans and things like that. Can you address a little bit why we're just discussing the annexation at this point?
Sure. Well, for the annexation, as opposed to addressing the wholesale set of plans, we typically deal with many of the additional issues such as drainage requirements, utilities, the actual site configuration more through the plating process, and even more finer grained detail as they get to the building permit process. When we're considering a annexation, we typically take those through a series of criteria that address things such as scale and massing and compatibility with the surrounding land area. So, for instance, issues such as open space, those are things we might get into in more detail when considering a subdivision application. Does that kind of...
Carl, am I allowed to speak?
Please, yeah, please.
Sure. And I may be dumbing this down too much, but take it to my level.
Sure.
Is it fair to say that annexation is just a first step? In other words, by annexing, it doesn't mean you get to start building out there. Annexation is just a step of getting it into the incorporated city boundaries so that it can have access to public utilities and other things that are from the city.
Sure, I think that's a fair characteristic.
So it's an initial step, but it's certainly not approving what we saw on the screen tonight. That's a vision of what might be there in the future, but it may never be developed and still be within the city boundary, which in some ways is good for the city because when it's annexed, it's subject to the property taxes of the city. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so if they wanted to develop on it, then they would have to come back here before the commission and a couple other steps, and they'd have to do a preliminary plat as a second step, and then a final plat. And each of those would be presented, the public would be made aware of each of those steps so that they would know what's going on there with the land. So maybe that's too dumbed down, but I guess that's my very basic understanding. And so this is just the first step of allowing that property to be within the city, subject to the city's taxes, but also available for the city's utilities.
Excellent. Thank you. One more question for you, and can you kind of discuss the relationship between the city planning process and the school district and how that works if a school is needed and whatnot?
Sure. I can get into it somewhat. I may have to defer to Matthew Lewis if needed. But basically for an application like this, the school district is notified, and we at the city rely on the schools basically to determine when an additional school may be needed to serve an increase in demand. For this application, we have not received any comment from School District 25, which had been noticed. If you'd like further detail on that, I'm happy to defer.
No, I think that's great. I appreciate that. Any other questions for Carl? Okay, I have a question for Merrill. If Merrill, you could step up for a moment.
Merrill Coyle, the Public Works Development Engineer for the City of Pocatello.
Merrill, can you address the tree removal and kind of some of the concerns there, and maybe in particular there, and perhaps some of the fire concerns or other things with tree removal?
Yes, the tree removal in these gullies as time's gone on is becoming more and more of a concern. We have in our condition, you'll see, as Mitch alluded to, the open space that's being provided in agenda item number 5 will be subject to fire-wise analysis. We'll go up there with the fire department and look at that. On that top end, some of the more dense trees and some more along adjacent to property lines that's going to be there for our houses are going to be built will be removed. They'll be thinned out, and the bottom ends of the branches that are closer to the ground will be lopped off and so forth, so that we don't see issues like, unfortunately, the disaster we've seen in the 4th of July over off of the Bitterroot area. where a house and another one got totally destroyed. And so that's what we're looking at, is trying to make sure that when the city acquires those properties, that that analysis and those trees are thinned out, not total removal, but that's what we're looking at the tree level to minimize and mitigate those fire issues.
Very good. Okay.
And will that affect the erosion on the...
We're not taking the roots out. We don't require the roots. I mean, I guess they could do that, and if it is, then there's also a mitigation plan for erosion. This is big enough area. It will be subject to the notice of intent with the EPA rules, as well as the City of Pocatello's local erosion control rules. As people look at that, I mean, you think that they'd want it more restrictive in there, but there's so much you can do, and we have watched those subdivisions and tried to keep them within the rules that we have.
Very good. Any other questions for Merrill? All right, thank you, Merrill. Okay, any discussion on the application, commissioners?
I want to thank the public for being here and the comments that were made and the civility of it. I'm always appreciative when citizens come forward and express, and so we are appreciative of the comments and the considerations that were raised tonight.
I've got a few things. So just to talk about how junipers burn, from my understanding, when a juniper catches fire, it doesn't just go up in flames like a typical tree. It will go up in flames and then literally explode. And so you've got sparks that just fly all over the place. I'm not saying that I like the removal of the junipers, but just to kind of clarify what happens when that happens. I'm kind of a self-proclaimed tree hugger, so when the open space is going away, when the trees are going away, I get it. I feel for you. I went up there today right as the sun was setting, and that view is absolutely incredible. But when you put house on top of house, all of a sudden the view of the mountains and that sunset becomes a view of your neighbor's roof. You know, I've said in the past, when we've had other annexation items, that at some point we need to draw the line. And I don't know if that line happens tonight or if that happens in the future, but I do think we need to look very closely at every annexation and see what does it actually provide for the local community right there, the local community as the larger Pocatello area. I appreciate that things like this do go to the school. I wasn't aware of that before, but them being involved in the process, I think, is a very positive thing to note. Yeah, and maybe if that school does need to be created, maybe we don't look at annexing something versus we reconstruct and actually use the infill that we have.
Mr. Chair, and I just want to, because I have great respect for what Julia is saying, but I also want to be cautious as that the annexation is statutorily driven, and as long as the criteria are met, I don't believe that we as a Planning and Zoning Committee have a right to override what the statute. It's just a matter of whether the requirements of the statute have been satisfied. If a line has to be drawn, I believe that line is a political line that has to be drawn and decided by legislators and not by a Planning and Zoning Committee. And so I'm sensitive to what you're saying, but I'm also want to be mindful of what our bounds are as a committee, and I don't believe, in this case, I look at it and I see that the statutory requirement's been met. I don't know what else we can do other than honor what the statutory requirement is. In this case, where it's private land, and the private landowner is requesting and consenting to the annexation, I think our hands are pretty tied, other than supporting what the statute says. And so I say that just out of caution, that there's times that if we don't like it, it still means that we have to look at and apply what the law says, or otherwise we become a law unto ourselves, and I don't think that becomes helpful or good for the public or the community. So.
Thank you. And in the end, we're simply making recommendations on this, and the city council or elected officials do make the final decision with these things. We're looking at them, we're getting testimony, seeing if for any reason, we should have great concern for this. As I look at this particular annexation, I think this is something that's been planned for years and years. It actually ties in a couple of different portions that have already been annexed and brings it together. I think it makes sense as far as what it is there. So. If there's any other discussion, be welcome to listen to that. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion on the matter.
I would move that we approve agenda item number 4 for the annexation of the subject property, and that the chair be authorized to make a findings of fact and a recommendation to the city.
I'll second the motion.
Very good. So it's been moved and seconded. Aislinn, would you call the vote?
Hancock,
Yes.
Hargreaves,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
O'Connor,
Yes.
Sanders,
No.
Satterfield.
Yes. Motion carries. All right, agenda item number 5, preliminary plat, Juniper Reserve Division number 2. Billy Satterfield of Juniper Land Corp., represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying, has submitted a request to subdivide 6.15 acres, more or less, into 11 residential lots located east of Juniper Reserve Division 1. The land is located within a residential low-density zoning district, or most of the land is, anyway. If we could hear from the applicant, Mitch.
Mitchell Greer, again, representing the applicant. You can kind of see here with our proposal. Again, this is, again, depending on demand, this probably will not get constructed this next year, but it could potentially happen. This might be 2 years, not this construction season, but the following construction season. So I want to speak to a couple of the issues, what's being provided here. I think in Pocatello right now, we have the Pocatello-Chubbuck area, we're short a fairly large number of houses for our population right now. I think normally, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but the normal healthy housing market has in the 400 plus homes on the market. I think we are averaging over the last few years in the 200 range, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood. So I think we're short houses right now in our market, and that's what these annexations and these subdivisions are providing. We went through a period of years, I can attest to it, where there was virtually no growth in our community. I'd say almost 10 years where we didn't really develop a new subdivision, and we advanced some of the subdivisions that were already in process, but basically a long time before additional new housing was added to our community. And right now, it seems like we're going crazy as far as development goes in this area, and we're doing a fraction of the development that we were doing back in the mid-2000s. So it's much more controlled, reserved, planned, I would say. So speaking in general about this area, and I realize this is just a master plan, but the Satterfields have been developing in our community for 3 generations. Actually, it could be 4 generations, sorry. I left Ryan. But, they've done a lot for our community. If you look at the growth basically east of the highway, they've had their hand in a lot of that. And they've preserved open spaces, you know, Highland, we forget about Highland Golf Course. That's a huge open space that was preserved in their developments. And they've reserved areas for schools and churches and open space recreation areas. So, and there's additional ones planned. So again, we try to do a good job in planning. We don't see every situation and every issue, but we really do spend a lot of time and effort trying to make this an asset for our community, not a burden, I guess. And so with that, I just want to add one more thing too, just quickly. You know, where the line gets drawn, I appreciate Mr. Hancock's statement there. I would like to see, you know, if the line gets drawn, it gets drawn through the ordinances, right? So we try to comply with the ordinances that are presented and the community provides us. And so that's where the line has to get drawn. So once we're allowed to proceed and sort of have a guideline for which we should do that, then, you know, if we meet those guidelines, these projects should move forward. And in particular, in these areas that have been planned for years, Mr. Satterfield alluded to that. You know, I've been developing subdivisions in this area for almost 20 years. And they developed again for generations ahead of that, or prior to that. So this isn't something that's just a single project that's been there. This land was purchased with the intent of development. It's, you know, it's been slow there for a period of about 10 years, but the demand is there now, and so we're starting to develop more as you go forward. And you know, this, not to get off topic too much, which I am, but this, you know, Summit Hills is up above higher. That, again, is someday going to get developed, which impacts a lot more of these draw areas and things like that. It is it's a planned area that was for our growth. And if you look around Pocatello, again, we talk about there's not an overabundance of developable ground. Okay, it seems like there is, but we are constrained by Chubbuck and by the reservation and by the hills. And so this new area that's available for development is more restrictive in our area than you see in Idaho Falls. That's good for us because it really does limit a lot of sprawl and things like that, but these projects are needed to support the growth in our area. This, back to this project, it's 10 lots. It's actually 11 lots, 10 residential lots. The 11th lot is the open space area that we discussed. They're very large lots, much larger than what is proposed. One of the interesting things that we have in this project is the water has already been looped through. The sewer and all the other utilities have been extended to the adjacent properties. And ultimately, this is going to create, you know, a nice loop for that neighborhood and kind of connectivity and everything that we strive for in planning. And so, again, based on the size and the availability of the utilities and things like that, we comply with the ordinances that have been established for which we develop under, and we would ask that you again provide a positive recommendation for this project. We'd like to move forward. We believe it is needed, and it will be constructed when the demand allows. So if there's questions, I'd answer them. Otherwise,
Very good. Thank you, Mitch. Any questions for Mitch? All right, thank you. Carl, if we could get the staff report.
Carl Anderson again for the record. So the application before you tonight, as we've discussed, is for the Juniper Reserve Division 2. The applicant is William Satterfield on behalf of Juniper Reserve Land Corporation, represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying. The application is for an 11-lot subdivision, 10 residential with 1 common area lot. Subject property is located in east of Juniper Reserve 1 and encompasses approximately 6.15 acres. The eastmost portion of the property is included in the east of Juniper Reserve Division 1 annexation of the previous agenda item. You can see here Mitch's drawing is provided. The green outline is the subdivision under consideration, and the gray in portion is the area under consideration for annexation under the previous agenda item. The property is zoned residential low density, and the annexed portion is also proposed to be zoned residential low density. The residential low density zoning district requires a minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet for a single-family residence, and the smallest lot proposed is 13,767 square feet. Staff has reviewed this application and recommends approval of the application as currently proposed. Public Works has reviewed the application and also has recommended the application. Merrill Quell is here to answer any questions on the Public Works, and with that, I'll stand for questions if there are.
Thank you, Carl. Any questions for Carl on this? All right, thank you, Carl. Well, Commissioners, the items before you, any discussion, or if not, I'd entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the plat with the conditions set forth.
Very good. Do we have a second? Oh, Carl, do you have something? Yes.
If I may make 2 quick clarifications. The lot is actually not a common lot, it's the area to be designated to the city. And one additional condition that staff recommends not included in the staff report is that the final plat not be submitted until the annexation is approved and ordinance read by City Council, ensuring that the subdivision is in fact within the incorporated city boundaries at the time of the final plat submittal.
Okay, thank you, Carl. So with that, you can hold on to your motion or you can withdraw your motion.
Why don't you want it dedicated to the city?
It will be.
It will be, okay. Just wanted to double check
Yeah.
that. Sorry, misheard. Then I'll go ahead with my motion to approve.
And I
With
guess...
the conditions.
Yes, and his condition that wasn't on there, do you want to address that as far as the final plat not being submitted until the annexation is complete?
I would like to add that condition to it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you have that, Aislinn?
I'm getting them.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a motion. We have yet to hear a second.
I will second the motion.
Very good. So it's been seconded.
Who seconded?
Michael Hargraves. So Aislinn, whenever you're ready, if you will call the vote.
O'Connor,
Yes.
Hargraves,
Yes.
Hancock,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes. Motion carries. All right. Now we are on agenda item number 6, preliminary plat, Wildlife Way subdivision. Brad Frazier, represented by Rocky Mountain Engineering and Surveying, has submitted a request to subdivide 11.29 acres, more or less, into 21 residential lots, 18 buildable lots, and 3 common lots, located on Wildlife Way, north of Swisher Road. The land is located within a residential medium-density, single-family zoning district. Hear from the applicant.
Mitchell Greer again representing the applicant on this proposal. Some time ago, and I hope I have the rendering here. So this rendering was created, the original sort of vision for this property was a fourplex style development, and it was recommended for approval by this board. And through the process, as it was going through, my client was working with the Fish and Game to donate property to them and trade for an access, I guess. And that happened in the course of this application. And so therefore it I guess essentially nulled the approval. And so based upon that, my client has since sort of rethought how this project could be constructed, and kind of developed this proposal. So that the main change is essentially there's two significant changes from what was presented before. Before, the majority of the project was located on private drives and parking areas and things like that. And now what we have constructed here, proposed, are fully public right-of-ways through the project with lots accessing that right-of-way. So that's one change from what was presented before. And the second change is we're proposing duplexes. So we've reduced the density by half of what was approved prior. So that's essentially the difference. Right now, we're talking about roughly 11 acres is what this will encompass. And you can see this area here that we've talked a little bit about. That's kind of a hill area that will remain open, not to be developed. The density is much less than what it was, and I think after the meeting, although we got approval, I think he listened to what the residents said and wanted to try to make it a little more compatible, I think, with what they were talking about. So I think we've met with staff to talk about a few conditions, and one of the things, is again extending this cul-de-sac out so that it could be developed and provide access, I think, to some of the adjoining undeveloped property, and do some things like that. Obviously extending the utilities, and you can kind of see we've tried to update that as much as we could. But I think, again, we meet the code that's been given to us. The zoning is appropriate for this. It was zoned for this type of development. And again, I would just ask that you look to your ordinance for guidance and approve it based on the fact that it does comply with the ordinance. So with that, I'd answer questions. I'm sure there will be some, but I don't want to take too much time on this. There's things that we need to address specifically.
Thank you, Mitch. Any questions for Mitch on this application? All right, thank you, Mitch. Carl, if we could get the staff report.
Carl Anderson, Senior Planner, again, for the record. Before you for consideration, you have a preliminary plat application for Wildlife Waste subdivision submitted by the applicant Brad Frazier and represented by RMES, Rocky Mountain Surveying or Engineering Survey. The application is for a 21-lot subdivision with 18 buildable lots, one of which has an existing single-family home, 3 lots to be designated as common area. The subject property is located the subject property is located east of Wildlife Way and sits on approximately 11.29 acres. The property is zoned for residential medium density single family, which requires a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet for a single family home and 8,000 square feet for a two-family home, a duplex. The smallest lot proposed measures 8,620 square feet. Staff has reviewed the application and is happy to and recommends approval of the preliminary plat for the Wildlife Waste subdivision. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and Meryl Quayle is also here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Maybe before we get into questions, Meryl, are there a few things that you would like to address on this, if you would, and then maybe we can go into some questions after that.
Merrill Quell, Public Works Engineer for the city. Mr. Greer had already addressed most of them, but just to reiterate, as we look at the screen up there, that this area right here, this little turnaround part will go away, and the road and utility will extend to a cul-de-sac right here. Some of the off-site improvements for Mr. Frazier's property, but it's within a dedicated right-of-way that already exists. So there will be a current fire required cul-de-sac to be placed there with utilities extended. The part that we see in here, there's another part along here which is the right-of-way of Grove, and on item number 3 in the Public Works Special Conditions, it states that the curb and gutter and so forth would be placed. We are going to require a real covenant, which we've done in a lot of areas in different places for development at different levels, to be signed that if and when that right-of-way is improved, that the adjacent owner, currently Mr. Frazier, would be responsible for those improvements. This will leave a little bit of flexibility in the plan for that area. If it is not placed, it leaves the option that that right-of-way could be vacated and some other development could happen there off of the end of Short, which is the street that you see right here in right-of-way. So that might lend to some other development that could happen and some flexibility there, that we're not just putting something in that may need to be torn out or at a future date or something. So I wanted to share that with you. And also item number 13, we don't need to remove it, but just so you're aware, we have received that document from the Fish and Game. However, it doesn't need to be removed. It's there, it's a condition, it's been satisfied. So.
Very good. All right, thank you, Meryl. Any questions, commissioners? Julie?
With this type of zoning, what is the maximum height that a building can be?
35 feet.
Any other questions? It appears that, and staff, I believe, has met with the applicant and worked through a bunch of things, and so appreciate the staff doing that and helping this along. Any discussion? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I would be interested, and I don't know if Julie is willing to speak on it, but you're the member who lives the closest to this, and obviously we've heard a lot from the neighbors before.
Sure.
And I don't know your thoughts on the changes that's been presented.
So when this was presented before for the rezoning, I was not a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission at the time, and I was actually one of the people who came forward during the public hearing against it. And part of the rationale was it seemed to us that they were trying to build too close to the slope, taking away the slope. I live in one of the twin homes just up the street, and the slope in the backyard is just ridiculous. My cat loves it, but nobody else does. Part of it was the road itself, because Wildlife Way is not the best road. Part of the issue was the traffic coming into Barton Road, which is still not the safest intersection in Pocatello. But if you figure we've got roughly 34 vehicles maximum, I think this is a lot better. You know, I'm still kind of wondering what the overall picture will end up looking like, but I parked there and just kind of thought about it for a while, tried to envision what this actually looks like in that space. You know, how do I feel going to work every day right past this? And I appreciate it. I do. I think it's so much better than what the original plan was.
I too appreciate it, because I remember that hearing well that night, and I do appreciate the owner. It seems like it is a much more consistent plan with the neighbors. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I would recommend, especially after hearing Julie, I'd recommend that agenda item number 6, I've lost count now, be approved.
Very good. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. So it's been moved and seconded. Aislinn, if you would call the vote.
Hancock,
Yes.
Sanders,
Yes.
Hargreaves,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
O'Connor,
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes, motion carries. So that will conclude our meeting for the evening. We are now adjourned.